"He's long gone," my daughter-in-law said, as if she were talking about a package that had already been delivered and forgotten. I stood there in my kitchen, still holding the phone, my fingers curled so tightly around it that they had gone numb. For a moment, I thought I had misheard her. At 71, you start to question your ears before you question your family. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice quieter than I intended, steady in a way that surprised even me. There was a pause on the other end, not long, just enough to feel deliberate. "We already buried him," Emily added, her tone flat, efficient, like she was checking off a task on a list. I didn't respond. I couldn't. The words didn't land all at once. They came in pieces, like something fragile breaking slowly. "Buried him? Already? My son, Daniel." I looked around the room as if something in it might confirm or deny what I'd just heard. The coffee maker hummed softly on the counter. The morning light filtered through the blinds, laying thin stripes across the table where I had sat with Daniel just 3 months ago, listening to him talk about work, about fixing the old deck, about how he'd come by more often. I had believed him. Why wasn't I told? I finally asked. My voice didn't shake. That was the strange part. It felt like it belonged to someone else, someone watching this happen from a distance. Emily sighed, not heavily, just enough to suggest inconvenience. It all happened quickly. There wasn't time to call everyone. Everyone. The word lingered. I wasn't everyone. I was his mother. I waited for something more, an apology, an explanation, anything that sounded like grief. But there was nothing. Just silence stretching thin between us. "You should take care of yourself," she said after a moment, softer now, but not warmer. "There's nothing more you can do. Nothing more you can do." I nodded, though she couldn't see it. My hand loosened around the phone, and I lowered it slowly, ending the call without another word. The house was quiet again. Too quiet. I walked to the window and stood there, staring out at the empty street. No cars. No visitors. No signs that anything had changed, even though everything had. I tried to picture it, the service, the people, the place where they had laid him to rest, but my mind refused to fill in the details. There was only a blank space where I should have been. I pressed my palm against the glass, feeling the cool surface ground me in the present. Somewhere, somehow, my son had been buried. And I had not been there. Not called. Not told. Not even considered. I closed my eyes for a moment, not to cry, but to steady the sudden, quiet realization settling deep in my chest. This hadn't been an accident. This hadn't been rushed or forgotten. It had been decided. Carefully. Quietly. Without me. I did not sleep that night. I did not turn on the television or reach for a book or even make myself another cup of coffee. I simply sat in the same chair by the window, watching the street as the hours passed, as if something might arrive to explain what had already been done. The clock on the wall ticked with a steady, indifferent rhythm. 3 o'clock. 4. 5. Morning came without ceremony, pale light stretching across the floor, revealing the same quiet house, unchanged, untouched, as though my world had not just been rearranged without me. Daniel used to call me every Sunday morning, not out of obligation, not because anyone reminded him, but because he said it made the week feel right. I found myself staring at the phone on the table, waiting for it to ring, even though I knew it would not. Old habits do not disappear just because reality changes. They linger, stubborn and hopeful. By 7, I stood up and walked through the house, not with purpose, but because sitting still had started to feel unbearable. The hallway creaked in the same places it always had. The framed photos along the wall remained exactly where I had placed them years ago. Daniel at 12, holding a baseball glove that was too big for his hands. Daniel at 25, standing beside me at his wedding, smiling in that quiet way of his, as if he knew something good was coming. I paused there longer than I meant to, studying his face, searching for something I had missed, some sign that he had been pulled away from me long before this moment. The kitchen still smelled faintly of the coffee I had brewed hours earlier. I poured it into a mug anyway, even though it had gone cold. It felt like something I was supposed to do, something normal, something that belonged to a world where mothers were told when their sons were laid to rest. I took a small sip and set the mug down untouched. There were no calls, no messages, no explanation waiting in my inbox, no neighbor stopping by with a casserole or a quiet word of sympathy. Nothing. It was not just that Daniel was gone. It was that I had been erased from the moment of his leaving. I walked to the small desk in the corner of the living room, and opened the drawer where I kept important papers. Not because I knew what I was looking for, but because I needed something concrete, something that still followed rules and logic. Bills, receipts, old birthday cards. A letter Daniel had written me 5 years ago, folded neatly, the paper worn at the edges from being handled too many times. I unfolded it carefully, my fingers steady now, and read his handwriting, slow and familiar. He had thanked me for always being there, for never letting him feel alone, even when life had not gone the way he expected. I read that line twice. Never letting him feel alone. The words settled into me differently now. Somewhere between that letter and this morning, something had shifted. Not in him, but around him. I folded the paper back along its original lines and placed it exactly where I had found it. Then I closed the drawer and stood there for a moment, listening to the silence again. It was no longer just empty. It was deliberate, carefully maintained, like a door that had been closed and locked from the other side. I reached for my coat, the same one I had worn for years, and slipped it on slowly, adjusting the collar out of habit. If no one was going to tell me where my son had been buried, then I would have to find out myself. Not because I needed permission, but because something inside me had begun to change. I was no longer waiting for answers. I was going to look for them. I stepped outside just after 8 in the morning, the air cool and still, the kind of quiet that usually felt peaceful but now pressed in on me from all sides. The neighborhood looked exactly the same as it had the day before. The same trimmed lawns, the same parked cars, the same distant sound of a lawn mower starting somewhere down the block. Nothing had changed out here, which made what had changed inside me feel even more unreal. I walked slowly at first, my hand resting lightly on the strap of my purse, my steps measured as if I were giving myself time to turn back. But I did not turn back. I followed the sidewalk past the houses I had known for years, past the corner where Daniel used to wait for the school bus, past the mailbox where he once left me a note when he was 10 years old because he thought I might worry if he was late. Every step carried a memory, and every memory felt sharper now, clearer, as if something inside me had shifted into focus. I did not call anyone before leaving. There was no one I trusted to tell me the truth, not anymore. Instead, I headed toward the small community center 2 blocks away, the one place where information tended to travel faster than official channels. If there had been a service, someone there would know. As I approached the building, I saw Mrs. Thompson standing near the entrance, holding a paper cup of coffee, her silver hair pulled back neatly, her posture as straight as ever. She noticed me almost immediately, her expression changing in a way that was subtle but unmistakable. Not surprise. Not exactly. Something closer to recognition, as if she had been expecting to see me sooner or later. "Margaret," she said softly as I walked up, her voice carrying that careful tone people use when they are not sure how much you already know. I nodded once in greeting. "Good morning." The words felt ordinary, almost out of place, but I said them anyway. She hesitated for a moment, glancing down at her cup, then back at me. "I was meaning to call you," she said, though there was no apology in her voice, only a quiet awareness. I watched her closely, not impatient, not demanding, just waiting. "There was a service," she continued, her voice lowering slightly. "Yesterday morning. At the chapel on Maple Street." The words landed exactly where I expected them to, but hearing them out loud made something inside me settle into certainty. Not shock, not disbelief, just confirmation. I did not ask how many people attended. I did not ask who spoke or what songs were played. None of those details would change what mattered. Was it quiet? I asked instead, the question forming before I could stop it. Mrs. Thompson gave a small nod. "Very." She studied my face as if searching for a reaction, something she could respond to, but I offered her nothing. No tears, no raised voice, just stillness. "I thought you might have been there," she added gently. "I did not receive an invitation." I replied, my tone even, almost polite. The sentence hung between us, simple and complete. She shifted slightly, uncomfortable now, her fingers tightening around the cup. "Emily handled everything," she said, as if that explained more than it did. I inclined my head once, acknowledging the information. Of course she had. That was becoming clearer with every passing moment. "Thank you," I said after a brief pause, and turned away before she could say anything else. I did not need comfort. I did not need sympathy. What I needed was direction. Maple Street was a 10-minute walk from where I stood. I knew the chapel she had mentioned, A small white building with narrow windows and a simple sign out front. Daniel had attended a service there once, years ago, for a colleague. I remembered him mentioning how quiet it had felt inside, how peaceful. I began walking again, this time with more purpose, my steps steady and certain. The pieces were no longer scattered. They were coming together, one by one, forming a picture that was difficult to look at but impossible to ignore. This had not been a mistake, not an oversight, not something that slipped through the cracks of a busy day. It had been arranged, managed, controlled, and I had been deliberately left outside of it. As I reached the end of the block and turned toward Maple Street, I felt something shift fully into place inside me, something calm and clear and unyielding. They had made their decision. Now it was time for me to understand exactly why. I saw the chapel before I reached it, small and white just as I remembered, sitting quietly at the corner of Maple Street as if nothing important had happened there at all. The front door was closed, the sign beside it still listing last Sunday's service hours, unchanged, indifferent. I slowed my steps as I approached, not because I was unsure, but because something in me needed a moment to take in what had already been done without me. The gravel path crunched softly under my shoes, the sound too loud in the stillness. There were no cars in the lot now, no people gathered in quiet clusters, no flowers being carried in or out. Whatever had happened here had already been cleared away, neatly and completely. I stood at the base of the steps and looked at the door, imagining it opening, imagining voices, the low murmur of condolences, the careful tone people use when speaking about someone who has just passed. I tried to picture Daniel inside, not as a memory, but as he had been at the end, but the image would not form. My mind kept returning to him as a boy, running ahead of me, turning back with that same half-smile, waiting to see if I would follow. I placed my hand on the railing and slowly walked up the steps, each one measured, deliberate. When I reached the door, I paused, then pushed it open. The hinges gave a soft sound, not loud enough to echo, just enough to remind me that I was entering a space that had already held something I had been denied. Inside, the air was cool and still. The rows of wooden pews stretched out in front of me, empty now, the aisle clean, the small podium at the front standing exactly where it always had. There were no flowers left, no programs, no visible trace of what had taken place. Only a faint scent lingered, something subtle and clean, like polished wood, and something else I could not quite place. I walked slowly down the aisle, my hand brushing lightly against the edge of one of the pews, grounding myself in the physical space. This was where they had sat, where they had listened, where they had said goodbye, without me. I reached the front and stopped, looking at the space where his name must have been spoken, where someone had stood and summarized a life I had been part of from the very beginning. I wondered who had spoken, who had decided what parts of him to share, what parts to leave out. Whether anyone had mentioned the way he used to call me every Sunday morning, or how he would still ask my opinion before making big decisions, even as a grown man. Or if those pieces had been quietly set aside, like I had been. I sat down in the front pew, not out of exhaustion, but because it felt like the place I should have been from the start. The wood was cool beneath me, solid and unyielding. I rested my hands in my lap and let the silence settle around me. It was not the same silence as before. This one felt full, layered with everything that had already happened, everything I had not witnessed. I closed my eyes for a moment, not to imagine the service, but to listen to what remained. There was nothing dramatic in it. No sudden realization or overwhelming wave of emotion. Just a quiet understanding, steady and clear. This had been organized carefully, intentionally. Every detail handled, every decision made, every moment accounted for. Except for me. I opened my eyes again and looked toward the front, my gaze steady now. If they had been this deliberate in leaving me out, then there was a reason. And reasons leave traces, even when people think they have covered them. I stood up slowly, smoothing my coat out of habit, and took one last look at the empty room. This was not where my search ended. It was where it began. I did not leave the chapel right away. I stood there for a few seconds longer than necessary, not because I expected anything to change, but because walking out meant accepting that whatever had been hidden from me had been carried out completely. When I finally stepped outside, the sunlight felt brighter than before, almost out of place against the weight that had settled quietly inside me. I walked down the steps slowly, my hand brushing the railing again, grounding myself in something solid, something real. The street was still empty. The same quiet stretch of pavement and houses that had not noticed anything had happened here at all. I turned left without thinking, letting my feet guide me rather than any clear plan, but I did not go far before I heard my name. Margaret. The voice came from behind me, steady, familiar in a way that made me stop before I turned. I recognized it immediately. Mr. Harris, Daniel's attorney. I had not seen him in months, not since the last time Daniel mentioned updating some paperwork after a promotion at work. I turned slowly, and there he was, standing near the edge of the sidewalk, his dark coat buttoned neatly, a folder tucked under his arm as if he had been on his way somewhere else but had chosen to stop. His expression was calm, but there was something else beneath it, something measured, like a man who had already decided how much he was going to say before the conversation even began. "I was hoping I would find you here," he said as he walked a few steps closer. I did not ask how he knew I would come. It did not matter. "You knew," I said instead, my voice even, not accusing, just stating what had become obvious. He held my gaze for a moment, then gave a small, almost reluctant nod. "I was informed of the arrangements," he replied carefully. Informed. The word was precise, chosen, not involved, not consulted, just informed. I studied his face, watching for hesitation, for anything that might suggest uncertainty, but there was none. Only control. "And you did not think to tell me," I said. It was not a question. He exhaled slowly, shifting the folder slightly under his arm. "It was not my place," he answered. The instructions were very clear. Instructions. That word settled differently. Not a decision made in grief. Not confusion. Instructions meant planning. Direction. Someone had set this in motion. "From Emily," I said. Again, not a question. He did not answer immediately, but he did not need to. The silence confirmed more than words would have. I turned slightly, looking back at the chapel for a brief second, then back at him. "There is more," I said quietly. It was not intuition. It was recognition. Patterns do not stop at one action. They continue. They build. Mr. Harris watched me for a moment longer, then reached for the folder under his arm, his movements deliberate, controlled. "Your son updated several documents about 6 months ago," he said, his tone professional, detached in a way that felt practiced. "Estate-related matters." 6 months. I let that settle. That was before the last time Daniel had come to my house for dinner. Before he had stood in my kitchen, leaning against the counter, telling me everything was going well, that there was nothing I needed to worry about. "Did he come alone?" I asked. Mr. Harris paused for a fraction of a second, just long enough for me to notice. "No," he said finally. "He did not." I nodded once. Of course he had not. And everything was signed. I continued, my voice steady, each word placed carefully. "Finalized." Another brief pause. Another measured answer. "Yes." I looked at the folder in his hands, not reaching for it. Not yet. I did not need to see the papers to understand what they represented. This was not just about a service I had not attended. It was something larger, something that had been set in place long before Daniel was gone. Something that required timing, control, silence. I met Mr. Harris's eyes again, my own calm now, clearer than it had been all morning. "I would like to review everything," I said. Not as a request, as a decision. He studied me for a moment, then gave a small nod, as if he had been expecting that response all along. "Of course," he said. And in that moment, standing on the quiet street outside a chapel that had already closed its doors on me, I understood that whatever had been done behind my back was not finished. It had only just begun to show itself. We did not speak much after that. Mr. Harris gestured toward his car, parked just a few feet away, and I followed without hesitation, my steps steady, my thoughts quieter now but sharper, like something inside me had settled into place. The drive to his office took less than 10 minutes, though it felt longer, not because of distance, but because every second carried a new understanding that what I was about to see would not surprise me anymore. Not truly. His office was exactly as I remembered it. Clean. Organized. Everything in its place. The kind of space where nothing existed by accident. He motioned for me to sit, and I did, placing my purse neatly beside the chair, my hands resting in my lap as I waited. No nervous movement. No fidgeting. Just stillness. He opened the folder slowly, not with hesitation, but with care, as if he understood the weight of what it contained even if he would not say it out loud. The first document he placed in front of me was simple. A title at the top, my son's name printed clearly beneath it. I looked at it for a moment before lowering my eyes to the text below. The language was formal, precise, the kind that leaves no room for interpretation. I read each line carefully, not rushing, not skipping ahead. My eyes moved steadily across the page, taking in every detail, every clause, every carefully chosen word. And there it was. The shift. Quiet. Legal. Final. Assets reassigned. Authority transferred. Decisions centralized. Not vague. Not implied. Explicit. I did not react. Not outwardly. My fingers rested lightly against the paper, holding it in place as if it might move on its own if I let go. This was executed 6 months ago, Mr. Harris said, his voice even, offering information without commentary. I nodded once, acknowledging what I already knew. The timing was not random. It never is. I turned the page slowly, my movements deliberate, my breathing steady. Another document. Then another. Each one building on the last, forming a structure that was too complete to have been created without intention. Emily's name appeared more than once. Not in passing. Not secondary. Central. Positioned carefully, repeatedly, as if someone had made sure there would be no confusion about her role. I paused at one section, reading it again, not because I did not understand it, but because I wanted to be certain that I understood it exactly as it was written. There were no provisions left for me. None. Not even symbolic. Not even procedural. I was not mentioned as an oversight. I was absent by design. Was he aware of the full extent of these changes? I asked, my voice calm, my eyes still on the page. Mr. Harris hesitated, just slightly, enough to confirm that the answer was not simple. He was present, he said carefully. Present. Not the same as informed. Not the same as understanding. I let that distinction settle quietly in my mind. I closed the folder gently, aligning the edges of the papers as I did, restoring the order that had never truly been disrupted. Then I placed my hands on top of it, pressing down lightly, as if grounding myself in the reality of what I had just seen. There are no earlier versions here, I said, lifting my gaze to meet his. Nothing before this. He held my gaze for a moment, then reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a second folder, thinner, older, its edges slightly worn. He placed it in front of me without a word. I did not open it immediately. I looked at it first, at the difference between the two, at what it represented. Before and after. I rested my hand on top of it, feeling the slight texture beneath my palm. And for the first time since this morning, something close to clarity moved through me, not as a feeling, but as a decision forming quietly, firmly, without hesitation. Whatever had been changed, whatever had been redirected, whatever had been taken out of my hands, had not started yesterday. It had been built, step by step, and if it had been built, then it could be traced. I opened the second folder slowly, not with urgency, but with intention, knowing that what I was about to read would not just tell me what had been done, but how it had begun. I opened the older folder with both hands, careful not to rush, as if the paper itself required respect. The first page was dated 3 years earlier, long before anything had started to feel wrong, long before I had noticed the small shifts in Daniel's voice during our calls. My eyes moved slowly across the document, recognizing the structure immediately. This was the version I had always believed existed. Balanced. Thoughtful. It mentioned me by name, clearly and directly, not as an afterthought, but as someone who mattered. Not everything was left to me, of course, but there was consideration, intention, a sense that he had wanted to take care of the people who had been part of his life from the beginning. I read it twice, not because it was difficult to understand, but because I needed to remember exactly what had been there before it was changed. When I turned the page, I saw his signature at the bottom, familiar, steady, unmistakably his. I paused there for a moment, letting that image settle in my mind. That was Daniel, the one I knew, the one who had written me letters, who had called every Sunday, who had never made decisions lightly. I closed my eyes briefly, then opened them again and continued. The following pages showed minor updates over time. Small adjustments. Nothing unusual. A percentage here. A clarification there. All consistent. All reasonable. And then, about 8 months ago, the pattern shifted. The changes became more frequent. Larger. More concentrated. My name appeared less. Not abruptly removed, but reduced, piece by piece, like something being quietly edited out of a story. I did not stop reading. I followed each revision, each amendment, each subtle reallocation, tracing the movement of everything that had once been stable into something increasingly narrow, increasingly controlled. Emily's name appeared for the first time in a supporting role, then again in a more central position, and then again, until it was no longer a question of presence, but of dominance. I noticed the dates carefully, the spacing between them, the progression. This had not been a single decision. It had been a sequence, deliberate, patient, structured in a way that suggested guidance, not impulse. He came in several times, Mr. Harris said quietly, as if responding to the direction of my thoughts without needing me to speak them aloud. Not always with the same documents. Not always with the same requests. I nodded slightly, still looking at the pages. But he was not alone, I said. He did not answer, but I did not need him to. I could see it now in the margins, in the timing, in the way certain changes aligned too closely to be coincidence. There were moments when Daniel had come alone. That much was clear, but the most significant revisions, the ones that reshaped everything, those had a different rhythm, a different weight. I reached the final amendment in the older folder and stopped. It was dated, just weeks before the complete revision in the newer file. My name was still there, but barely, reduced to a fraction of what it had once been, almost symbolic, as if someone had decided it was easier to leave a trace than to remove it entirely all at once. I closed the folder slowly, placing it beside the newer one, the two of them resting next to each other like before and after versions of a life I thought I understood. My hands remained still on the desk, my posture unchanged, but something inside me had settled into a shape that was no longer uncertain. This was not confusion. This was not grief making decisions too quickly. This was influence, repetition, persistence. Someone had stayed close long enough, spoken often enough, guided carefully enough, until the outcome looked natural on paper. I lifted my gaze to Mr. Harris, my expression calm, clear. He did not change his mind overnight, I said. He was led there. The room remained quiet after that, but it was no longer the kind of silence that waits for answers. It was the kind that confirms them. I did not ask any more questions after that. There was nothing left to clarify, not in words. Everything that mattered was already in front of me, laid out in neat, structured lines, each decision recorded, each change justified on paper. I gathered both folders carefully, aligning their edges before closing them, my movements slow and deliberate, as if restoring order where something had quietly unraveled. "May I take copies?" I asked, my voice steady, not requesting permission so much as confirming the next step. Mr. Harris nodded without hesitation. "I will have them prepared," he said, already reaching for the documents. I stood while he worked, not pacing, not restless, simply waiting. The room felt smaller now, not because of the space itself, but because everything inside it had become clearer, more defined. When he handed me the copies, I accepted them with both hands, placing them neatly into my purse, securing them with care. "If you need anything further," he began, but I inclined my head slightly before he could finish. "I will let you know," I said, my tone calm, final. There was nothing more to discuss here. Outside, the air felt different than it had that morning. Not lighter, not easier, but sharper, as if the world had edges I had not noticed before. I walked back to my car, opened the door, and sat for a moment before starting the engine. The folders rested beside me, silent but heavy with everything they contained. I did not drive immediately. Instead, I placed my hands on the steering wheel and looked straight ahead, letting the stillness settle once more, but this time it did not feel empty. It felt focused. 6 months. That was the window. That was when everything began to shift, when the balance changed, when the decisions that led to this morning were set in motion. I thought back to those months, not in fragments, but in sequence, replaying each visit, each conversation, each small detail that had once seemed ordinary. There had been changes, subtle ones. Daniel had started canceling Sunday calls more often, always with a reasonable explanation, always with that same quiet assurance that everything was fine. When he did visit, Emily was always there, never in the background, never distant. Present, attentive, watching. I had not questioned it at the time. Why would I have? Families change. People grow closer, drift apart, adjust to new rhythms. That is what I told myself then. But now, those moments arranged themselves differently, forming a pattern I could no longer ignore. The way conversations would shift when I entered the room. The way decisions were already made before I was asked for my opinion. The way Emily would answer questions directed at Daniel, not interrupting, but redirecting, guiding the direction of the conversation with a calm confidence that I had mistaken for involvement. I exhaled slowly, my fingers tightening slightly on the wheel before relaxing again. It had not been loud. It had not been obvious. That was the point. Influence does not announce itself. It settles in quietly, over time, until it no longer feels like influence at all. It feels like choice. I started the car then, pulling out of the parking space with steady hands. There was only one place left to go. Not the chapel, not the office. Somewhere else. Somewhere the final piece would be waiting. I knew the address without needing to look it up. Daniel's house. I had not been there since before everything changed, not because I was not welcome, but because visits had become less frequent, more carefully arranged, until they stopped altogether. I turned onto the main road, the familiar route unfolding in front of me, each turn carrying a memory, each landmark reminding me of a time when nothing felt hidden. As I drove, I did not rush. There was no urgency in my movements, only certainty. Whatever had been done, whatever had been decided, whatever had been taken out of my hands, it had passed through that house. And now, so would I? I pulled into the driveway slowly, the tires rolling over the same concrete I had stood on countless times before, but everything about it felt different now, as if the house itself had shifted into something unfamiliar without changing its shape. The curtains were drawn halfway, not fully closed, not fully open, just enough to suggest someone was inside, but not expecting company. I turned off the engine and sat there for a moment, my hands resting lightly in my lap, my eyes fixed on the front door. There was no hesitation in me. Not anymore. I stepped out of the car, closed the door quietly, and walked up the short path, each step steady, deliberate. When I reached the porch, I noticed something small but telling. The welcome mat had been replaced. A different color, a different pattern, a small detail, but one that confirmed what I already understood. This house had been reset. I raised my hand and knocked once. Not loudly, not softly, just enough. It took a few seconds before I heard movement inside, the faint sound of footsteps crossing the floor, measured, unhurried. Then the door opened. Emily stood there, her expression composed, her posture relaxed in a way that suggested she had not been surprised to see me, only mildly inconvenienced. Her eyes met mine, steady, unreadable. "Margaret," she said, her tone neutral, neither warm nor cold, just controlled. I inclined my head slightly. "Emily." There was a brief pause, the kind that exists not because there is nothing to say, but because both people are choosing what not to say first. She stepped back just enough to allow space for me to enter, a silent acknowledgement that this conversation would not remain on the porch. I walked inside without hesitation. The air in the house smelled faintly different. Cleaner, lighter, as if something had been cleared away recently. I took a slow look around the living room, not searching, just observing. The furniture was arranged the same, but the details had changed. A framed photograph that used to sit on the side table was gone. The one of Daniel and me from his graduation. In its place was something newer, something curated. I did not comment. Emily closed the door behind me and moved toward the center of the room, positioning herself in a way that kept a comfortable distance between us. Not defensive, not welcoming, strategic. "You should have called," she said, her voice calm, as if this were a matter of courtesy, not consequence. I looked at her for a moment before responding. "I was not given the opportunity to call," I said evenly. She did not react. Not outwardly. Only a slight shift in her shoulders, almost imperceptible, as if adjusting to the direction of the conversation. "Everything happened quickly," she replied, repeating the same explanation, the same carefully chosen words. I let the silence stretch for a second before speaking again. "I went to the chapel," I said. Her gaze did not change. "Then you know," she answered simply. Not defensive, not apologetic, just a statement. I nodded once. "Yes, I know." I reached into my purse and removed the folder, placing it gently on the table between us. The sound it made against the surface was soft, but it carried weight. Her eyes flickered to it, just for a moment, then back to me. I also know about this. I continued, my voice steady, my posture unchanged. There was no immediate response from her. No denial. No surprise. Just that same controlled stillness, as if she had already anticipated this moment and prepared for it in advance. Daniel